If you were a kid back in the 90s and played video games, then you probably rented a lot of them. It was just part of being a kid back then, going to the video store, looking through the shelves to see what looked fun, and then getting yelled at by your parents because you were taking so damn long. It was pretty good times. And if you ever did any of that, then I'm sure you noticed those games that just somehow never left the store. The games that somehow survived on the shelves for months or maybe even years just because no one ever gave them a chance. Hey guys, welcome back. Today, we're looking at 4 games that basically took up residence on video store shelves. We've got a British platformer that most people just walked right past, even though it's kind of amazing. A game that took one of gaming's most iconic characters and put him in the last genre that anyone expected or wanted. A pirate seal that copied Sonic in every single way except the important one, and one that I just genuinely believe scared people off by existing. So let's just get started with the one that a lot of you have recommended over the past year, but yet almost no one played back in the day. First up is a little game called Plok, and I'm going to start out this one by asking just how many of you have actually heard of this one. Because if you have, I'm sure you're probably already nodding your head in agreement. And if you haven't, well, I need you to stick with me here because this one is really weird. Plok came out in 1993 on the Super Nintendo, developed by Software Creations and published by TradeWest. And if Software Creations sounds familiar, I can almost guarantee that you played at least one of their games, because these guys made a lot of games. But by the time Plok came out, they had mostly just done ports and licensed stuff. Plok was one of the few times that they actually got to do a completely original IP. But being a completely original IP in 1993 was probably the worst thing that could have happened to Plok. 1993 was an absolutely stacked year for the Super Nintendo. You had a few little games like Mario All-Stars, MegaMan X, Star Fox. The list just kept going that year. And Plok, with its weird name and a box that didn't exactly scream "rent me," just kinda got buried. But for the people that did find it, they tended to really like it. Plok at first may look like your standard action platformer, but his big gimmick is that he can fire his arms and legs off as projectiles. This was actually well before Rayman hit the scene, so this was actually pretty original for the time. And it does work fairly well when you've got all of your parts attached. You can fire all of them off fairly quickly, but if you miss your target, you have to wait for them to float back to you, leading to times where you're literally just a torso hopping around waiting for your body parts to find their way back to you. You can also lose limbs as you play, so there's like this weird strategy of knowing just how many limbs you have at any given moment. Beyond your limbs not being fully attached to your torso, this does feel like your standard platform game. Plok jumps around the levels, smacking enemies with his body parts, and makes his way to the end of each level. But the stages themselves are, to me anyway, what makes this game stand out. They're just so strange, but in mostly a good way. You do have your standard get to the end of the level stages, but then there's these more open stages where you have to find and kill so many of these flea creatures before you can actually finish it. And then there's other stages that seem completely freeform with their design. Like it all just feels so random from stage to stage. And we'll get into why that's not necessarily always a good thing in a minute. And the weirdness just keeps going with everything populating those stages as well, because there's so much stuff. The enemies in each stage are a complete fever dream on their own, but there's all this other stuff that just randomly pops up, like targets that require limbs to activate and then completely reforms part of the stage. And then there's these presents sitting around some of the stage that turns Plok into a completely different character with their own unique attacks. Also, there's this thing that just kind of shoots water at you, but whenever you shoot it and then hop onto it, it blasts you off into the air as a platform. Why does it do this? I don't know. This is just a small sampling of the craziness that are these levels. Like, even if you don't want to play the game, do yourself a favor and pull up the manual online and witness what it's like when game developers just lose their minds. Even crazier though is that one of the first things that most fans of this game mention isn't how insane the game itself is, it's the soundtrack. And for good reason. The music in Plok was composed by Tim Fallon and his brother Jeff, who basically re-engineered the Super Nintendo sound chip to do stuff that it was never never really supposed to do. The result is a range in music that's almost as insane as the gameplay is. One minute you're listening to a harmonica melody, and the next is like this weird electronica stuff. It's a legitimately impressive soundtrack that gets brought up just about any time someone talks about this damn game, which is pretty wild when you think about how the rest of this game is a guy throwing his arms and legs at things in a world that just makes zero sense. But with all that said, there are some problems with the game that are kinda hard to overlook. One being that the difficulty curve is a bit just all over the place. Some sections are almost too easy, and then the game suddenly spikes hard with no warning at all. Also, the level design is unique to a fault a lot of times. As cool and weird as they are, they're still not very well designed. A lot of them just seem very unfocused, and occasionally purposely lead the player in the wrong direction. When the game's hitting on all cylinders, you can generally overlook it. But more often than not, you'll just be confused with what the stage wants you to do. For the most part though, those moments are outweighed by just how consistently creative the whole game is. Plok is exactly the kind of game that should have just found a bigger audience than it did. But I know just by running this channel that a lot of you did pick this one up, either out of sheer curiosity or just confusion. But the point is that it did reach some kids out there, and they all seem to have really good memories of it, and I can see why. This one really stands out. So if you're someone that's just never experienced the insanity of Plok, or you just like to dig through the Super Nintendo library looking for stuff that got overlooked, Plok is probably one of the better finds you're gonna make. It absolutely deserved more time in the hands of 10-year-olds on a Friday night, it just never quite got there. Next up is a game that I need to explain a few things about before we even get into what this game actually is, because the name alone raises a question, and that question for most of us kids back in the day was why? MegaMan Soccer came out in 1994 on the Super Nintendo, developed and published by Capcom. And if you were a kid in a video store in 1994 staring at this box, you had one of two reactions. Either you thought it sounded incredible and you grabbed it immediately, or you thought it was the most confusing thing you had ever even seen and you put it back down and rented Street Fighter instead. And based on how often this thing stayed on the shelf, I think we know which reaction was the more common one. But here's the thing about MegaMan Soccer, it didn't really come out of nowhere. By the early 90s, Capcom had already put Mega Man in some really unexpected places. Of course you had the NES games, but Mega Man had also done a pinball game, which I guess isn't too weird, everything had a pinball game back then. But how about a business simulator done in the style of a board game? No, I'm not kidding, this actually did exist. Plus, Mega Man would eventually go on to be in his own fighting game around the same time as this game. The point is that Capcom wasn't afraid to toss Mega Man into other genres, no matter how weird they were. This game also came out right in that window when the 1994 World Cup was happening in the United States, which was a pretty big deal for American soccer at the time. So the timing actually does make some sense from a business standpoint. But the weird thing is that this game skipped over Europe entirely. This only came out in Japan and the US. So Capcom just completely skipped over the entire region where Mega Man Soccer might actually make some sense. Meanwhile, most of us kids in the US barely knew what soccer was back then. So what's it like to actually play Mega Man Soccer? Well, I know this is gonna blow your mind, but it's a soccer game, like a real soccer game. Not some loose interpretation of the sport either. This isn't Mario Soccer where everyone's just running around like an idiot and smashing through goals with super moves. This is just soccer with a few Mega Man touches tossed in. You've got 8 players per side, actual soccer rules, goal kicks, out of bounds kicks, all of it. If you took the Mega Man characters out of this game, you'd be hard pressed to think that this wasn't an EA FIFA game. But since this is a Mega Man game, your entire team is made up of Mega Men and a ton of Robot Masters. Guys like Iceman, Cutman, Snake Man, basically the whole crew. But before you can even get excited about any of that, you've got to spend time before each match picking which characters you want for each position by looking at a wall of stats and then picking their formation without explaining what a formation is and then where each individual character is in that formation. Are we sure that this is a Mega Man game? Mega Man and each Robot Master does at least have a special ability that's tied to their powers from the main games. So Mega Man shoots a super shot straight forward like how he charges up his blaster. And most of the Robot Masters have their own unique shots that have different abilities that are better suited for different situations. Though most of the powers do just sort of shoot straight forward and do something to the goalie before they bounce into the goal. And I'm not kidding when I say that this is the only thing in the game that actually feels like it comes from Mega Man. But how's about that actual soccer itself? I mean, it's okay, I guess. It controls fine, the AI isn't completely hopeless, and the games can get kind of exciting when the special shots start flying. But, I mean, for the most part, it's a pretty slow-paced game of normal-ass soccer. None of the characters really have any sort of on-the-field moves that differentiate themselves besides their basic stats, so it just all kind of turns into your standard soccer match of pushing the ball down the field. It works well enough, but it never really goes beyond just being a decent soccer game with Mega Man painted on top of it. The Robot Masters are kind of fun to play around with, but once you figured out which special shots are the most effective, you just kind of tend to use those over and over. Where the game at least tries to lean into Mega Man a bit more is the story mode called the Capcom Cup. This mode actually has some cutscenes and a plot to explain why Mega Man is even playing soccer in the first place. You even get to choose your opponent via the classic Mega Man stage select. But the problem is, as soon as you jump into a stage, it's just soccer. It's cool that it's in the game, but I just wish it added something on top of the standard soccer gameplay. Like maybe some basic objectives, boss fights, mini games, anything that has something to do with Mega Man. The game does at least look pretty good for a Mega Man soccer game. The Robot Masters all look like themselves, the animations are pretty good, and there's a unique stage for each character. So the game does at least have a little bit of that Mega Man personality there, at least visually anyway. The biggest issue with Mega Man Soccer, if you couldn't tell, is that it falls into this weird gap. It's not deep enough to satisfy someone who actually wants a serious soccer game, and it's not simple enough or action-packed enough for someone who actually wants more Mega Man. It tries to thread the needle between those two audiences, and kind of only partially succeeds with both. It's not bad, it's totally a playable soccer game that can be fun, but if you're a Mega Man fan, it just kind of wastes the whole Mega Man aspect of it, which is kind of the whole point of the game. But really, there just wasn't too many kids here in the US wanting a Mega Man soccer game in the first place. To say soccer was a niche sport over here back then would be putting it lightly, and that probably explains why this game just lived on rental shelves. A kid would see Mega Man and think that this is a brand new Mega Man game, but then they'd see soccer in the title and just kind of get confused. As it is, it's just a weird curiosity that earns its reputation as one of the stranger things that Capcom put out in the 90s. And personally, I'm just glad Mega Man quickly retired from the sport and then went back to fighting robots instead. Next up is one that I don't think too many of you have actually heard of, High Seas Havoc. And I think this is one of those games that you can look at and instantly see why it never left the video store shelf. High Seas Havoc on the Genesis came out in 1993 and was developed and published by Data East, which is usually a good thing. But after Sonic hit in 1991, every developer, including Data East, started trying to figure out how to clone it, and what you ended up with was this whole wave of anthropomorphic animal mascots that all basically wanted to be Sonic. The market was absolutely flooded with all these attitude-having animals who moved fast and liked to jump on top of things. And High Seas Havoc here is definitely part of that wave. As you can see, it takes a lot of its inspiration directly from Sonic. But the weird thing is about High Seas Havoc is that even though it looks like it's this fast-paced Sonic-style game, since basically everything else about it is copying Sonic, what you actually end up with whenever you play it is one of the slower-paced platformers on the Genesis. Which, I mean, that's not necessarily bad, but it's actually crazy just how much the game copied the Sonic formula and then just kind of forgot to include the whole gotta go fast aspect of that game. You play as Havoc, a swashbuckling pirate seal, which is certainly different, out to rescue his friends that have been kidnapped by a villainous walrus pirate named Bernardo, which is a great name for a video game character, with everyone trying to find this gem called the Emeralda. It's basically your standard video game story from 1993, besides the whole thing of playing as a seal. The stuff you can do with Havoc is pretty limited. You got a jump, a mid-air kick, and a roll to squeeze under things, and that's pretty much it. The box art for the game actually shows Havoc with a sword, which would have probably fit more with the pirate theme, but it doesn't actually exist in the game. So someone decided the sword should just be marketing only, and all you can do in the actual game is awkwardly spin kick enemies to death. And I hope you like high difficulty platforming, because that's what Havoc is all about. It seems like what the developers took away in the speed department, they added just as much in the platforming, because there's a lot of it in this game. Just about every single level is a series of platforms and jumps that'll probably make you start throwing your controller at anything nearby. Which wouldn't be too bad, except that the developers also saw fit to copy Sonic's heavier, more floaty controls. And those controls made sense in a Sonic game, but in this game that requires precision jumping for almost every single stage, it gets kinda rough. But the funny thing is though, is that you can actually find speed up boots that make you move at a slightly faster speed. But this is definitely not one of those games where going faster helps you most of the time. Like early in the game, there's this stage where a massive fireball is chasing behind you, and if it touches you once, you are basically dead. To stay one step ahead of it, you gotta use these fire hydrants to deal with the smaller fireballs that are blocking your path. But just trying to move faster to get out in front of that big fireball makes the platforming in this level really tough, because you just don't have time to compensate for those heavy Sonic controls. At least you'll be falling off platforms in some awesome looking stages though. The graphics in Havoc are really impressive, and probably the best thing about the whole game. All of the stages look great, and not in that great for a Genesis game kind of way. It's just a really good looking 16-bit game. All the characters look great, the bosses are huge and expressive, and there's a ton of graphical variety to keep those endless platforms looking different in almost every stage. Also, Data East could always do a great soundtrack, and the music in this one is surprisingly good. I wouldn't call it great pirate-themed music, but it does capture that early 90s platformer game music that instantly makes you nostalgic. It's just sad no one ever heard it because no one ever rented it. High Seas Havoc just wanted to be Sonic so damn bad and ended up being something slower, harder, and more interesting actually than what you'd probably expect it is. But it's just kind of a tough sell. The difficulty alone will probably frustrate most people before they get to the good stuff, and at the end of the day, it never really figures out what it wants to be. A Sonic clone that feels like Sonic, or a precision platformer that asks you to slow down and think a little bit. What it definitely is though, is a game that deserved more than it got. It's sitting on that rental shelf every single week next to a dozen other games that looked just like it, and nobody was in a hurry to find out what this pirate seal had to offer. Which is a shame, because it's a fun little tough platformer with a cool pirate theme that almost no game back then even tried. And I think you should try it out yourself if you've never heard of this one. Just bring an extra controller if the other one ends up thrown out into the yard. And I think we saved the best for last, or at least the one with the most to talk about in terms of why it ended up on that video store shelf every single week. Greendog, the Beached Surfer Dude, came out in 1992 on the Genesis, developed and published by Sega itself, and yes, that is the name of the game, Greendog, the Beached Surfer Dude. But you gotta remember, this is 1992, and things like this were pretty common at the time. This was also when Sega was trying to be the cool alternative to Nintendo, and sometimes it worked, and sometimes you get this. And look, I do understand what they were going for. Like I said, it was the early 90s, and whatever Greendog is kind of what you got in the early 90s. And to Sega's credit, surfer culture was kind of having a moment back then. But what we ended up with was something that pretty much just missed the mark in almost every single way. Believe it or not, Greendog was Sega's attempt to create a new mascot for the Genesis. Sonic was doing pretty great at the time, but Sonic was only one character on one console. Nintendo, meanwhile, had a whole roster of iconic characters by that point. But Sega, I mean, they basically had Sonic and, I guess, Alex Kidd. But I think even by 1992, Sega realized that Alex Kidd wasn't gonna be a thing. So they just kind of went on this weird mascot creation binge. This was about the time you started getting stuff stuff like Kid Chameleon and Chuck D. Head. And then you also got Greendog. Greendog, though, wasn't a completely original creation by Sega. It's actually based on a 1988 board game called Surf Trip, created by a guy named Rick Green, who's basically the real-life dude that Greendog the character is based on. And then someone at Sega looked at all of that and decided this would make a great Genesis game, and maybe a new mascot to boot. The premise for that video game, though, is that Greendog is this surfer dude, obviously, who gets cursed by an ancient Aztec necklace that he finds in the ocean. The hot girl that suddenly appears out of nowhere explains to him via endless exposition that the curse means that any animal that gets near him now immediately attacks him, which is really convenient for a video game because now everything wants to kill you. Playing through this one is probably a bit more awkward than it should be. Greendog is like this big, lanky sprite and never really feels that great to control. His main attack is a frisbee that he throws horizontally, which does work well enough since you can just kinda spam it for an endless frisbee attack. And you can also find power-ups like an umbrella that gives you invincibility, a clock that stops everything in their tracks, and a sentient frisbee that just kinda floats around you. None of these really ever pop up too often though, so half the time you kind of forget they even exist until one just suddenly appears. The game for the most part though is really simple. Basically just walk around various island locales until you find the exit. The stages themselves can be heavy on platforming, which we've established ain't Greendog's strength, with a ton of jumps that never really seem like they should be that hard, but you'll keep missing them anyway. At least the temple stages offer up some light exploration in the form of hitting switches to make your way past some doors that need to be opened, along with some skateboarding sections where you have to dodge obstacles and a little stage in between the stages where you have to fly your Greendog copter to the next stage. And like a lot of things in Greendog, none of this is really necessarily very fun, but at least you can't say the game doesn't have variety. That variety, though, can't save the game completely. As mentioned, the platforming feels awkward at best. The frisbee combat never really requires any skill besides just jam on the button and hope that you're lined up with the enemy, and some of the level layouts have kind of awkward sections that grind the game to a halt and can also just be hella frustrating. But I'm gonna be honest here, it's not as bad as I thought it'd be. In fact, it's kinda competent. It's not a fun game, but it's not necessarily a bad game either. It's just kinda okay. I think this game just really fell victim to kids taking one look at that box and the title and passing it by. The box alone is just a really bad example of early 90s radical surfer dude art, and also maybe having your character just have a fleshy knob for a head probably wasn't a very good idea. But at the very least, Greendog isn't quite the mess that the internet claims it to be. Yes, it is an easy punchline thanks to the terrible name and box art and the whole concept just being cringe as all hell, but the game underneath all of that is actually mostly fine. It obviously never became the mascot Sega wanted it to be, and Greendog just kinda disappeared after 1992 and became exactly the kind of game that we're talking about today. Something that just sat on the shelf every week while kids walked past it on their way to Sonic the Hedgehog. But I think if they had given this game a chance, they would have found that it's mostly a decent little rental. Something that you pick up once when nothing better's in, have an okay time with it, and then for some reason remember it for the rest of your life, because it was at least something that stood out from the norm. Maybe not for the right reasons, but it did stand out. And honestly, I think that's probably about the best thing you can say about this unfortunate surfer dude with a fleshy knob for a head. Well, there you go. There's 4 games that lived on the shelf. And what's interesting to me is how different the reasons are for each of them. And I think that's what the video store era did to a lot of these games. You had about 30 seconds to convince someone to grab your box off the shelf. And if you didn't nail those 30 seconds, you were just there every week, available, waiting for someone to take a chance. And these 4 games just never really got that chance. But honestly, 2 of them kind of deserve it. I'll let you figure out which 2 those are. But that's gonna do it for me this week. like. If you rented any of these back in the day, then I'd love to know which ones, so let me know down in the comments. And if there's a game that you remember just always being available at your video store that I didn't cover today, then drop that in there too, because I'm absolutely gonna revisit these in the future. Also, do me a favor and give this one a thumbs up if you had a good time watching it, and be sure to sub to the channel if you want to see some more videos like this one in the future. But as always, thanks for watching this one, and have a great week, guys.